Well, it is very, very good to be home. Not everyone knows, but the last 3 weeks I was at MCC Toronto, Ontario. And I was there for 1 week first as study leave and learning as much as I could about what they do and what I could bring back for us here. And then Sarah Helen came and joined me, and she sang there. And then we were on vacation this last week, but we were there for 3 Sundays. And it's a wonderful church, wonderful, loving people. And it's very, very, very good to be home. And I keep having questions, and I just want to keep saying, I'm not going anywhere. Sarah Helen's not going anywhere. This is our home. This is where we're called. Yeah. We are not called MCCPBG. I was very honored to be with them. Toronto is an awesome city. But let me tell you, it was hot, and they did not have air conditioning like we had here. And we had 3 services every Sunday, 9 a.m., 11 a.m., and 7 p.m. And by the time you get to 7 p.m., the sanctuary was just like an oven. So it was something. But really, really wonderful church. And they send their blessings and their gratitude for sharing. And probably one of the best things about being there, and also we did some traveling in Western New York and went to a place called the Chautauqua Institute, if you're familiar with that at all. We just met so many incredible people from all over the world, and that was really something. And it's just this past 3 weeks with everything we've experienced and reflecting on the scripture today, it's just made me realize how much we are all different from where we come from and our different life experiences and where we're from in different parts of the world, and also how we really as human beings are the same. You know, we want to be loved and we want to love. We want to live in safety and respect. We want to have lives of purpose and meaning and wholeness. And especially with a number of the people we met, it's also made me reflect so much on how our lives are shaped by our choices and by the power that we have in choice. And our story today about Lot's wife, Mrs. Lot, if you will, is really all about the role of compassion and encouragement and faith in the choices that we make, and in how those choices really protect and nurture this fragile gift from God called life. So that's what we're going to take a look at this morning. Would you pray with me, please? Holy One, thank you so much for this gift, this fragile, tenacious, wondrous, maddening, luminescent gift of life that you give us. We thank you for this gift this day, and pray that even now, God, through your Holy Spirit, through the power of the risen Christ, you are raising us up even now, God, to make choices from moment to moment that draw us closer to you and draw us more deeply into our calling and more willing and able to hear your voice directing us and asking us, God, to do your work in this world. So help us to hear you clearly now, God, and only your voice. And may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be acceptable and pleasing to you now and always. Amen. So today, in our continuing Bad Boys and Bad Girls of the Bible series, we're taking a look at Lot's wife, also calling her Mrs. Lot, for lack of a better name, because like many women in the Bible, we don't know her name. She is referred to only by a Hebrew word that just means woman. Basically, every woman can be kind of a word that's a stand-in for every person, meaning that Mrs. Lot really, in many ways, can represent all of us here today. And her story is mostly found in Genesis 19, which is, of course, also the infamous chapter in the Hebrew Scriptures that gives us the story of Sodom and Gomorrah and God's destruction of those evil cities. This is where booing and hissing is appropriate. I will say more about this in the class, Discover the Bible, if you'd like to come to it. Today, we don't have time to unpack the whole story of Sodom and Gomorrah and why it was destroyed, but the short version is it was not because of homosexuality. Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed because they were utterly loveless places. The people there cared nothing for others. They were all out for number one, what they could get, no matter what the cost, and anyone else. That is why Sodom and Gomorrah were destroyed. So for more on that, come to the class. Today, though, is just the story of one small family that God saved from the destruction of that city. And one member of the family is Lot. He is the nephew of Abraham, the great first patriarch of the children of Israel. But Lot is there with his wife, whose name we don't know, Mrs. Lot, and their 2 daughters. And one day, God sends angels that probably look like you or me. Well, maybe not. Well, maybe, who knows? Could be. God sends angels that maybe look like us to warn Lot and say, you've got to get out of this city. And a lot happens, but basically it boils down to this. Lot kind of drags his feet, and the angel is saying, Lot, get your family out of the city. It's going to be destroyed. And so Lot goes off first to his sons-in-law, his future sons-in-law, and says, come on, we got to leave. This thing's going to happen. And they kind of laugh at him and don't take him seriously. So Lot kind of meanders back home and still isn't taking things seriously. And the angels say, Lot, get out. And they pick up Lot and his wife and the 2 daughters, and they're hustling them out of the city of Sodom. And the angels say, flee for your life. Do not look back. Do not stop. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Just keep going. Do not look back. But as they are fleeing the city, in that moment of crisis, for whatever reason, Mrs. Lot looks back, and she is changed into a pillar of salt. And what's so interesting about her becoming a pillar of salt is that in that moment she became like everything around her, because Sodom is right by Mount Sodom, which is an actual mountain that still exists. It is a mountain entirely made out of salt, because that area is where the Dead Sea is, and everything is made out of salt there. And so she became this immovable, intractable pillar of this material that was everywhere. And that's pretty much all we know. Jesus makes a brief reference to her in the 17th chapter of Luke, when the disciples are saying, Jesus, when are you going to come again? And Jesus says, nobody knows when the dominion of God is going to break open among you. Oh, and also, by the way, Jesus says the dominion of God is within you. Remember Lot's wife. And basically, I think he's saying, you never know when God's dominion is going to bust forth within you and among you and through you. Remember her. Don't be looking back, but just be prepared, because it can happen at any time. And that's all we know about Mrs. Lot. Usually, almost always, her story is interpreted as this. Well, she was really hankering after that old sinful life back in Sodom, and she just didn't want to leave it, so she looked back, and God punished her, right like that. I don't like that interpretation. The God I serve and love doesn't usually go around turning people into table condiments. Or otherwise. And her story is one of silence. How often do we make assumptions about people whose story we don't know? How often do people make assumptions about us and they don't know our stories? We don't know her story. We really don't. She's a woman in the Hebrew Scriptures. Like most women in that time, they were kind of nobodies. They were invisible nobodies. And we don't know. We don't even know if she was there when the angels gave the command to Lot. Maybe she didn't hear it. Maybe she didn't want to go. Maybe she found some friends who were better than her sorry husband. If you don't know much about Lot, just trust me, he was not going to win Husband of the Year award, or Father of the Year for that matter. I'm sure she was afraid. They were rushing away from what she did know to the unknown. Maybe all she could see in that moment was the selfishness and the cruelty of her husband, and that she was having to run off and be with him one more time somewhere else she didn't want to go. Maybe Sodom looked better. Maybe she just couldn't trust God's love and compassion, because God had, up to that point, on several different occasions with those angels, tried to save Lot and his family. Probably in that moment of panic, she didn't even think about what she was doing. She just did what instinct told her to do. Who among us, when we're faced with a time of crisis, makes exactly the right choice every time? Reverend Barbara Essex says this about Mrs. Lott. She says, "Perhaps some of us are like her. We do things and we don't know why. We hesitate, even when all seems well. We take the chance to look back when our lives really lie ahead of us. We long for something other than what we have. Mrs. Lott stands as a puzzle for us, raising questions rather than providing answers. Perhaps it is enough to have the ghost of her presence to remind us that at any moment, in the twinkling of an eye, things can change. Life and death are not in our control. Mrs. Lott reminds us of the fragility of life." And I would say she reminds us too of the power of choice. And that the first thing I think that is important to remember about the power of choice is to remember to be compassionate with ourselves. I know so many people who say, well, they could have made a better choice. And that's usually true, when we mess up. But sometimes we have to go through a lot of messing up before we develop the ability to make a different choice. Sometimes just not even be able to make the right choice teaches us the lesson we have to have before we can go on to do something different. And maybe for Mrs. Lott, in that moment, it was the best that she could do. Again, we don't know so much about her story, but I think the place to remember the power of choice in those times of crisis, or in those times when God is taking us from an old place, but we can't yet see the new place, is to begin with compassion for ourselves. Because sometimes if all you can do is just hold the awareness of, I have a choice in this moment, sometimes that's the only place you can begin. And you might make the wrong choice or not the best choice, but then later on, with practice, you can go on and do something different. The place to begin is with compassion. And I think the place also to begin is to take in the stories of others that encourage us to make the best choices we can. And this one's probably present with me because I met so many people these past 3 weeks who encourage me with the choices they're making. I'll tell you about a few of them in just a moment. But first, I just want to lift up today the story of a young girl named Sadako Sasaki. August 6, 1945, 70 years ago, was the anniversary of dropping the bomb on Hiroshima that our government did on that city that brought an end to World War II. And there was a little girl in Hiroshima who lived a mile from where the bomb dropped. And she was about 2 years old at the time, and her name was Sadako Sasaki. And she actually escaped that terrible ordeal without a scratch, on the outside anyway. And as her family and her city and her country rebuilt and she grew, she had a chance at some normalcy in life and friends and fun. And as she grew, she seemed like a normal little girl until she got to about the age of 12, when she got sick with what they called then A-bomb disease, which was leukemia. And as she got sicker and spent time in the hospital, she remembered a Japanese legend that said that if you folded 1,000 paper cranes, that when you got through 1,000, you could make a wish. And what she wanted to wish for was world peace. That there would never be another A-bomb or other children with the A-bomb disease. So people started bringing her paper from all over, and she chose in this time when her life was changing in a way she had absolutely no control over whatsoever. Her choice was to do this seemingly small thing that focused on beauty and creativity and prayer, because each paper crane you fold is a prayer. That's what she focused on. She focused on that. That was her choice until she died at the age of 12 in 1955. She was 346 cranes short of her goal. And so her classmates took up the challenge, and they folded enough cranes to get to 1,000. And more children all over Japan and around the world heard her story, and they helped to push the drive towards erecting a children's monument for peace in Hiroshima Peace Park. And that monument was blessed and put up in 1958 with the prayer, with her wish on it. This is our cry, this is our prayer, peace in the world. Now, I don't know that at age 12, this little girl had the maturity or the wherewithal or the self-awareness or the spiritual growth to say, oh, I'm in this place in my life where I don't have any choices, but I can choose to do this other thing, so I'm going to do it. Maybe she did. But the point is that is the direction that she went at the age of 12. And that no matter what age we are, things come along in our lives that completely upend everything. Things over which we have no control. Aging parents, our own health, changes in our employment, changes in our relationships. Change happens all the time, and so little of it we have no control over whatsoever. She had no control over this thing that happened to her because of the actions of the madness of the world 10 years before. And the choice she made was prayers for peace. Prayers that continue to echo in our world. And we might say, well, what good has it done? Look at all the war we still have. And that's true, but here's what we'll never know. How much more war we may have had without their prayers. And one other group of people these past 3 weeks really taught me so much about the power of choice. I mentioned that Sarah, Helen, and I met a number of people at the MCC in Toronto, and we did, from all over Canada, but we also met a large group of people, and some were from Kenya, and some were from Ethiopia, and some from Nigeria, and Malawi, and Ethiopia, and from Uganda. And these were the people who are largely lesbian and gay and transgendered refugees from Africa, who have fled their countries because their lives were in danger because of who they are. And MCC Toronto has a special ministry of doing what they can when Canada accepts someone with refugee status, because their lives are literally in danger because they are gay, or because they are lesbian, or because they are transgendered, that their government is literally raining Sodom and Gomorrah down on them to help them out of the country and come to Canada. And they try to help them find a place to live and a job and to fill out the reams of paperwork you have to do to get through your refugee status, to have it all approved, to be able to stay in the country, to be able to have that safety and that respect and that chance at life. And we met people from all of these countries, and the stories they told, so many of them sounded like 1950 United States. You know, having what passed for a gay bar that changes location from night to night to night, because it has to, of being arrested, of being afraid for their life, of being afraid they are literally going to be killed, not by some unknown stranger on the street, but by their government. Some of them come to Toronto literally with nothing but the clothes on their backs. I cannot imagine that choice of leaving a land trying to destroy me, trusting God to take me to a new place where all I have is what I am wearing, and trusting that there will be people at the other end to help me. And yet that's what they were doing. That's the choices they were making. And I'm sure from time to time they couldn't help but look back, but mostly they were looking forward to creating a life hand in hand with that church. And that church also making the choice to be there for them. And that, I think, is the greatest answer to the fragility of life, that it is a fragile thing, but together we have the strength to really live it fully, to really bring it to fruition. We'll never know why Mrs. Lott made the choices she made. We only know that we have different opportunities. And I think it helps to remember this poem by Denise Levertov called Beginners. I didn't even know that Jeremiah chose the video he chose this morning all about beginning. Each new day is a new beginning. When I chose this poem, that this is just a little part of it. It's an amazing poem. And it goes like this. She says, "Surely our river cannot already be hastening into the sea of non-being." It's really a line for the children in Hiroshima. Surely our river cannot already be hastening into the sea of non-being. Not yet, not yet. There is too much broken that must be mended. We have only begun to know the power that is in us if we would join our solitudes in the communion of struggle. So much is unfolding that must complete its gesture. So much is in bud. So much is always in bud in our lives. May we look to God, trust God with our faith to bring that bud to fruition together through the choices we make. In God's grace with us always. Amen.